All right, good. So this is just a check-in that I wanted to do as regularly as we possibly could this semester. Uh, and what we're going to be doing is looking at key information over the first three chapters of the course, of which most of you have done work in all those three chapters already. So let's go ahead and start. I'm sure others will join us as we go. First, just want to give you a little bit of background as to what the purpose of these meetings are, and to remind us as well as to the course flow. Just to make sure that I'm not fooling myself, if somebody would please just type that you can hear me, that'd be outstanding. Okay. All right. So the agenda is as follows. We're going to go over the purpose of the meeting, which basically is to review key information and provide you guys with an opportunity to ask some live questions. Basically, they'll take the format of what are we doing now this week or in this particular module as a summary as well as an overview. And then at the end and throughout the session too, you can try to pause me by sending a chat message or speaking up if you want to go that route to ask a question of me, and hopefully I'll be able to answer it during this live session. If I can't answer it fully the way I would like to answer it, then I'll get back to you and I'll feed it back to the rest of the group too if it's something that is relevant to everyone. Just to remind us what the course flow should be like. The idea is that each time you go to the Canvas site, you can go one or two routes. You can go to syllabus where you wind up initially, and if you scroll down to the bottom, you see all the tasks and assignments and due dates to do tasks as well as due dates as well. Or you can go ahead and click onto the modules, which I hope you do. Click onto modules, and then you'll see a bunch of modules there. One of them will be module 1, 2, and 3, and so on. Once you click onto that, you'll see a tabular format there where you can access key materials that I've sort of outlined for you that I hopefully will enhance your learning as we go through this material. So of course, reading the textbook is not a huge item, but the chapters are rather deep and intense at times, and we'll see that particularly as we move into the next module. You complete those chapter quiz homeworks, which you can do at any time throughout the module. You can save them and then submit them. Unlike the test, when we have the test open and you start it, you need to complete it. All right, so hopefully you'll be able to review and annotate the lecture notes as required and as needed for you guys to help prepare you for understanding the material. You can view the video lectures and complete the video lecture discussions when they are asked for. What I've done over the last couple of years anyway is I've recorded numerous sessions about this material, and so you guys have access to ones I think that were done probably last fall for the most part. Then you also have certain videos, usually from Crash Course or School of Life. View those videos, particularly the ones that I have highlighted, because they're going to be very pertinent to a lot of the material that we'll be going through. And then, of course, complete any standalone discussion forums as needed. I don't know, for you guys, I may have adjusted the course a little bit. Off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure if you have as many discussion boards as I have had in the past, because I have included a lot of the discussion boards with my video lectures. And of course, I try to provide to you just before the exam a study guide or a study session or something of that nature before you complete that module test. And as some of you have already done, please, using your chat feature, please send to me that you're present. If you have not used your full complete name, please provide that as well. And why I do this is, especially for these classes here, they're not mandatory to attend, but hopefully you'll learn something from it. But also, I usually provide some bonus points for attendance to these particular sessions. And I do apologize again for the lateness of this particular start. We had a couple of conflicts of sessions. One just ended, and so I was able to get on at 7:45 was the earliest. Okay, so I'll try to remind us to do the present thing if others show up as we go. So let's go ahead and move on. So where we have been and what are we working on? We've already conducted the welcome and orientation to the course. That's what you did a couple of weeks back on Canvas. You've already started chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. I've seen some of the input and things of that nature for you guys. So you guys are working through the system as intended, and that's good. So how we started this particular course is we talk about history, which makes perfect sense because the course is history and systems of psychology. So we talk primarily as to what to study when we talk about this thing called history. And we went over in the lecture notes that you guys have access to several ways in which we can study this stuff that's happened in the past. One way to study is what we refer to as presentism. And what happens there is that we examine the past in terms of our present knowledge and standards. That tends to be somewhat a little bit judgmental in a way, because what we're doing is we're using where we are today with our knowledge and our standards and mores to sort of put judgment in a sense on people and events and situations in the past. Okay, I can understand why we do that, but presentism is one way that we can study history. Another way that we talked about is historicism, okay, which is to examine the past without concern of relating it to the past to the present. So we just study history in of itself and not trying to draw any connections or conclusions about where we are today and where we were back then. We just study what happened to the best of our understanding by looking at the data that's available to us. So what to study is one thing. We also have what approach we can take. The zeitgeist is what we consider the spirit of the times. It involves a whole bunch of things, movements, technology, all the type of stuff that may have some influence on a particular historical period. And please note this, psychology does not exist in isolation. So we as a field and discipline will always be influenced by the things going on in a particular day or era or age. The other ways that we look at or approach history is the great person approach. I remember when I first taught this course years ago, and I was asking people to write a paper about a particular topic or something of that nature in history and systems of psychology. I was expecting a lot of variety, but what most people did, they wrote a great person approach to the study of history. That means I got lots of papers on Freud, lots of papers on Freud. But the idea with a great person approach, you look at the works of individuals, the works of people. And so that's how you're studying things that have gone on in the past, is by looking at individuals and what happened to them and what ideas they had. And then we have the historical development, how individuals and or events influence, change, or develop history. And of course, you're not tied to any one particular approach. You can use an eclectic approach where you can use a little bit of all these types of things, or maybe even something slightly different. And of course, why is it that we do all of this? Why is it that we are spending time going to history classes and even spending time here in a psychology class, one of the last that you usually take in our program? Why? Because we want to become aware of many of the things that you have probably learned already and have taken for granted, but we have to understand that someone had to come up with those ideas, and we want to see how those ideas developed, what were the situations in which these ideas had to develop. So by understanding how we have gotten to the point where we are now, we can start to recognize fads. You know, people are going through certain fads where they just do this type of stuff, or we can avoid repeating mistakes that were done previously in other research or in other schools of thought in early psychology. And of course, by looking at the history of what was done in the past, you can come up with some amazing ideas. And those of you who are planning on or headed toward graduate school, you'll be doing this to some extent as you try to find topics for your thesis and your dissertations. So we have a whole variety of reasons as to why we study history and how we can study history and what perspective we're going to take as we do so. So what we see in the outline of the textbook and of the course, we start talking initially about science. What is this thing that most of us have had some relationship with for a while now? And this science, what it is the following. Science is about trying to answer questions about nature. It's about trying to find some sort of truth. And we'll see as we go through the course, truth, believe it or not, many philosophers and early psychologists question about whether or not there is anything really like a truth. So I use the term of you have little truth and big truth. Little truth is basically how we see the world, our beliefs and things of that nature. With the big truth, something that is the way it is. And of course, we'll see there are plenty of debates about whether that is something that exists or not. But why do we want to have these questions about nature answered? Because we want to gain true knowledge, and we want to avoid what we'll see as we go through this course in the early days of psychology, or the philosophies that led to it, that society was built on blind acceptance. Society was built on you listening to authority figures, usually the church or feudal representatives of the king or something of that nature. So we want to try to avoid blind acceptance of things so that we understand more about truth and be more critical of the things that are put in front of us. So that's what science is for, to answer questions and to determine to some extent how it is that we gain knowledge. And that was basically the real question that early philosophers had as they tried to examine what science is and what it should be. And we have rationalism, which we'll see as you've read through the course, is about logic and rationale, that we can think things through logically. Or empiricism was about things that we can sense, hear, see, smell, touch, feel, those types of things. And the driving force behind this notion of science, where we are now, is that we do use both of those, empiricism as well as rationalism, to drive science in this modern era. And even back then, and as it is now, we wanted to search for correlational and causal laws, meaning we want to see what things are associated together or correlated with one another. And we also want to see ultimately what things cause another thing. And that's where we are today to some extent, where we are designing experiments, conducting research. If you've had the pleasure of taking PSYC400 research and methods, you know what that's all about. Okay, so the idea is that that is the root and core of science. So let's talk about where it sort of started and how we started talking about this particular topic with the textbook. So we start with the empiricists. So the empiricists, they believed the only way for us to truly gain knowledge, and that would mean to do science, was to gain knowledge from the unbiased observation of the world. The unbiased observation of the world. So what we see with the empiricists, that we, through association of our various observations, then we can come up with theories. Okay, does anybody want to chime in to say what is meant when the empiricist says they wanted an unbiased observation? What were they concerned about? All right, I don't put you on the spot. Go ahead.
People's opinions, their personal biases in there.
Exactly. That's really what it comes down to. They were concerned that it would not be true science, it would not be true knowledge, because whoever you were, you would have your bias in there. So they proposed that you had to be unbiased. You had to remove the idols of the tribe, I think one person said. You had to be totally sort of void of any preconceptions. Now, as we'll see with the next slide and others, some people saw that as being somewhat problematic, okay, because is there anyone here listening to the sound of my voice that is truly unbiased? And the idea is no. Everyone has some sort of bias. It's one of the first questions I asked in my intro psych course. I asked people at one point as I'm doing the intro lecture, how many people here are biased? Okay, so you have a class of 210s, freshmen and sophomores usually, and of course no one wants to raise their hand, and then I raise my hand, because you cannot have any belief about anything and not be biased toward it. Hey, I'm biased toward freedom. I'm biased toward being able to do what I want when I want it to some extent. Okay, but the idea is that that's what empiricists were looking for: unbiased, un, uh, undiluted observations. And they believe by doing that and by associating those observations in your mind, you can come up with theories, sort of sets of rules and principles to explain what you've seen. Now, that takes us to where things were as Popper, relatively recent individuals, started talking about and thinking about science from his perspective. So Karl Popper disagreed with the empiricists. And one of the reasons he disagreed with the empiricists, he basically referred to them and their approach, he referred to it as the bucket theory of knowledge. Bucket theory. So it's a very passive approach to science, because all you have to do is just to be and observe, and facts and knowledge comes to you, and then you just associate those things together somehow and you come up with a theory. And so Popper saw that passivity that the empiricists were saying was so greatly important to them was somewhat misguided. So he, as well as others as we see, he basically said that we are not passive seekers of information, that we are active seekers of information. Okay. Can someone explain? Someone just typed religion. What do you mean by that?
Oh, that was for an earlier question when you were asking about bias. I was
okay. Yes. Yeah. There are all sorts of biases out there, and we'll be talking about plenty of those as we go. As well, we will highlight a lot to do with the church in early philosophy and science. So the idea is, Popper sees us as active seekers. If you have been around any young kid, you can see they're active seekers of information. As soon as they start asking you why this, that leads to another why, and why is very, very annoying. But the idea is that we are naturally active seekers of information. So from that perspective, the empiricists, the way the pure empiricists viewed it, was sort of contrary to the way we are. So what Popper said was even more drastic. So the empiricist said observation, then theory. All right. What Popper would say, as others backed him up, we observe to see if our expectations are met. So when we observe something, we have to have something already in mind. So we must have something in mind already. And that something could be what we'd call a theory, a little t theory or a big T theory, but some sort of expectation, some sort of theory. And then we observe to see if our observations match our theory. So from the perspective of Popper, preconceptions are good. Preconceptions guide us. And he also highlights this idea too, that we'll see a little bit more in chapter 2 as well, is that theories are the idea of any observation you have will be theory laden. Theory laden. So I show someone a bunch of squiggly lines. I show them squiggly lines and they say, hey, that's just squiggly lines. I show the same squiggly lines to someone else and they say it's cursive writing, it's a poem. So the idea is whatever you observe will to some extent have some role to play in how you're going to see it. Your history will have some role as to what you're going to see. And we'll see an example of that shortly, I believe, when I highlight a little bit more about theory-laden observations. So what Popper proposes then was an interesting idea about what makes science science and what progresses science. He said, the goal is to falsify a theory. So what he's basically saying is that we need to flip the script in a way. We're not trying to prove something. We're trying to disprove something. We're trying to falsify it. So from his perspective, falsification is scientific advancement. So let me explain a little bit about what he means by that. And some of this information too is covered in one of the videos that you should have watched, one of the crash course videos that's about empiricism, I believe, in Popper. So a theory must be able to be proven false. That was key to him. If you had some sort of grand theory and you could not prove it false, then what is the point of it? There is none. So he compares two individuals who are somewhat contemporary with each other, Sigmund Freud and Albert Einstein. Now, everyone here, I'm sure, is familiar with both of them. You're probably more familiar with Freud for the most part. But the notion is Freud, he could probably explain anything, any outcome, because he did not have prediction, he had postdiction. So he would say, this person is obsessed with this, okay? But this person is totally obsessed with something totally different. And he could explain both behaviors with his theory, okay? But the problem with his theory was there was really no way to prove it one way or another as being false or not. Unlike Einstein, where when Einstein made predictions, these predictions could go one way or the other. They could be supportive of him or totally unsupportive and prove him wrong. So as was pointed out, Popper suggests that when you make predictions, they need to be bold predictions, okay? Bold predictions that can either be successful or fall flat on its face and fail. So when it is possible that it succeeds and sort of gains support for your belief, it's even a stronger case because it could equally has been it was destroyed and fell on its face. So from the perspective of Popper, this falsifiability is key to science. That's what he says is the backbone of science, the ability to falsify. So he sees scientists as testing to prove beliefs untrue. So he basically thought and believed that if we try to prove our stuff wrong and we keep proving stuff wrong, eventually there'll be something that's left. And what he thought would be left would be the truth. So Popper, totally disagreeing with most of what the empiricists were saying, at least the key ideas, okay, and basically believed then that science progresses through falsifying. And the idea is that you start to remove all the things which aren't right, aren't true from the playing field, and then you're left with a few things which are at least more true than the ones who are proven not true. Okay, and ultimately we'll find that last one, hopefully, that is representative of the truth, because guess what? We can't falsify that based on our best efforts. So that is what Popper laid out for us, and that's what we read in the lecture notes, observed in the videos and whatnot. The ideas of Karl Popper put next to the ideas of the empiricists. And we'll be seeing a lot more about the empiricists as we go even into the next module. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So that's Popper. And so Popper sets the stage. And then the next individual we see is Thomas Kuhn. And Thomas Kuhn, he was the individual who coined the phrase, the word paradigm and paradigm shift. So basically, his first statement that we want to talk about here is the following. We do not normally test to destruction. And what he's referring to there is that when someone comes up with a theory, he says scientists do not go about trying to falsify and destroy their theories, as Popper suggests. So one of the things that Kuhn would say is this, is that Popper was talking about an ideal of what science should be, all right? Whereas Kuhn was talking about what science is like. So he was taking a much more historical perspective on things, saying, what has science been like in the past? What are people doing from history? We can point out how science sort of unfolded. And so the suggestion there is that Popper did not take that particular tack, he basically said this is what science should be and how science should progress. Kuhn said otherwise. So let me just set the stage here. First, what is this thing called paradigm? In many ways, in a simple way, you could describe a paradigm as a specific type of scientific culture. Okay, a culture sort of like how a group of people have the certain rules, the regulations, how they interact, what they believe, and things of that nature. So in this case, what we're seeing is a group of people who share a paradigm. They have a shared theory of how to explain things, how to observe things. They have a practice. So how it is that you conduct research. What should you be doing in this research? What technology and tools do you employ? So when you have that, all that type of stuff shared by a group, they share a particular paradigm, how science gets done. So when you have a paradigm, and one of the key things I always liked was Kuhn would say, paradigms, when they mature, when you have a paradigm that is accepted, that's when you have a mature science. And that's when you see, from a perspective of psychology in a way, specialized journals for psychologists. Okay, now I'm sure many of you have read a psychological journal article before, and there's a sort of tact to do it and a way to do it, but it does speak in a certain language, a certain paradigm that we're trying to train you to have as future psychologists and psychology students. So the accepted paradigm is a mature science. All right. So the idea of how science works according to Kuhn would be this: scientists do not test to destruction, but scientists replicate and extend the paradigm. So you have a paradigm, how things get done, the theories you hold, the methodologies that you employ, and people do studies within that paradigm, and you may choose to replicate that study. Again, you know, that's a check and balance on the whole science thing. So someone does the same study and say, yeah, we've replicated it. But at the same time, you can also extend the paradigm. You can make slight changes to the approach, therefore extending it to a different population or a different protocol that was used. So we play the game of science within the paradigm. And that's the key thing that he's basically talking about, is that we basically do problem solving within the paradigm. We're not going outside the paradigm, because the paradigm tells us the rules to the game, so to speak. Now, so we have our fun paradigm going on. Everything's going hunky-dory. We're teaching classes. We're doing research, all this type of stuff. And then all of a sudden, bam, somebody did a study and we can't explain it. It's an anomaly. And this anomaly basically says maybe your paradigm, either the theories that you hold or the practice about how to do things, they may be flawed somehow. And what happens is we will try to ignore that anomaly because the system already likes the way it is. The system loves the status quo. So basically, we will do what we can. We'll try to ignore it. Maybe we'll rejig or change a few things here or there, try to make things fit. But the issue is this: if there truly is something wrong with our current paradigm, those anomalies will continually pop up. All right. So what happens is, if we can't ignore them and the anomalies keep popping up, and then those few people who wrote those articles that were the first anomalous articles that did not support our conclusions as to how things are related, then other people may start to do the same thing. They're starting to buy into what these upstarts are doing. And that is when you start to see some stuff start to happen. But it will take time. The nature of change is to fight it. Okay? We get comfortable in how we're doing things. And so that's why people are so afraid of change sometimes, because we're comfortable. Even if it's something that is you don't really like, at least you know it. okay, you know it, and you're comfortable with knowing the way how crappy things are, but at least you know it. But then you have to take a big leap not knowing what the new thing is. And so what happens ultimately is what he refers to as a scientific revolution or a paradigm shift. When the anomalies are too frequent, too numerous, that something has to give. It will take time, but ultimately it will change. And that's the scientific revolution. Now, the key thing that Kuhn pointed out, which some did not like, as we'll see in the next slide here, is he proposes that science has, as part of its component, is really non-rational. It's a non-rational process, okay? And this is how he explains why it's non-rational. First, we don't know the ultimate outcome of any new approach or new paradigm. So there's this big question mark as to, well, what's going to happen? Well, we don't know, all right? And then the other thing is what we saw previously in the previous slide. Observations are always, always, always theory laden. Theory laden basically saying is this: what is seen, what you are seeing, is equal to what we actually see and the theories we hold. So basically, physiologically, what you're seeing with your eyeballs, your retinas, your rods in your cones, your optic nerve, your thalamus, all the way to your occipital lobe where it gets processed, okay, plus the theories you hold, your biases, your motivation, your education. When I worked years ago at a Navy facility, I was part of the Human Factors Division, and I was an IO psychologist there. We would go into what would be a client meeting, basically Navy or Marines, and they would tell us some particular problem. You would have the room filled with Navy personnel, psychologists, and human factors personnel, ergonomics people. We'd leave, and then we'd get together with our human factors counterparts, and we would see the issue totally differently. As an IO psychologist, I always see the world primarily as an organizational issue or a training problem. And as an ergonomics individual, they always saw the world primarily as an interface problem between human and machines and equipment. And so the idea here is that what we saw in those meetings, what we took from the meetings, were totally different because of our internal factors, our education, our training. Now, sometimes because we have certain biases at play and we are looking for certain type of data when we're doing research, we may have inattentional blindness. Now, what inattentional blindness is basically when you are focused on something that you have an expectation to see and you focus on it, that means you may miss things which are there, you just can't recognize it. So imagine, if you would, you have a data set in front of you. You are already hardcore into one particular paradigm, the current paradigm, and there may be data points out there that if you looked totally and focused on those outliers, you may be able to see something that may be anomalous, something that is contrary to what your paradigm actually is. So far what we have here is that we never know the outcome of the approach. All of our observations are going to be theory laden, and also possibility of inattentional blindness. We just don't see data there. And then the other part is this: when you do have competing paradigms, okay, they are incommensurable. And basically what that means is this: when you have one paradigm and another paradigm, they have different philosophies, different theories, different methodologies potentially. And because of that, it's very difficult to compare them on the same scale. And so with all these things, that's why Kuhn always saw that this is a non-rational process, because there's so much about it that is either very subjective to a degree that we can't get past, or it's basically apples and oranges when it comes to the differing paradigms out there. Now, one thing I want to go over real quickly before we move to the next idea is, let's see if I can get this thing to work here. is this. Some of you have probably taken class from me before. You may have seen this before. Could I ask you guys to write down or tell me what is this here? Name the picture. What is it? All right, so we have the two choices there, face and rat or mouse. And basically what it comes down to is that is correct. So here is the nose, if it's a face, the eyeballs of the face, the top of the head, the chin, and the ear here. This is the snout of the mouse or rat, the eye of the rat, the ears, the back, the tail, hindquarters, front legs. Now, why I bring this up is because I use this to describe the idea of theory laden and about how things that we already hold may have an influence on what we actually see. So real quickly, bear with me if you heard this before. The idea is I go into an intro psych class. It's the first day of classes. We do a lot of talking and all this type of stuff. And then at one point, I hand out a piece of paper to the entire class. Unbeknownst to the class, half the class has one story, really short story, and the other class have a totally different short story, only a few sentences. One is a sentence or a little short story about a nursing home. The other one is a little short story about pest control. And so they read the stories, I take up the papers, then I go through lecture, and then at the end of the class, I put, you'll see how old this is. Use my overhead projector, okay, my overhead projector, and I flash it on the screen. And then I ask them, what did they see? And this is the way it will always work out. The class that read the short story about a nursing home, they saw a mouse. The part of the half of the class that read the short story about pest control, they saw a mouse or rat. So the idea here is that I just want to highlight the idea that things that we hold, the factors, the beliefs, our experiences will always have some sort of impact on what we are actually perceiving. That's the key point there. All right, any comments or questions before we move on? Okay, so far what we've seen now, we started off with empiricists and their ideas about it's all about sensation, about our observations. Then we saw Popper, it's all about falsificationism. And then we saw Kuhn and says it's more about the paradigm and the anomalies that disrupt the paradigm that can lead ultimately to a scientific revolution or a paradigm shift. That's the way science is done. Now, the other individual, Lakatos, he comes along and says, okay, he did not like the approach that Thomas Kuhn had. So he was against the irrationality of Kuhn's paradigm. Now, Kuhn basically had all these subjective factors in the heart of science and how science progresses. And Lakatos referred to it as being sort of like, well, that's mob psychology. Okay, so he was thoroughly not pleased with the ideas that Kuhn had proposed about how science is progressed. So Lakatos, he was greatly and positively influenced by Popper. So he was adherent to the Popper approach, which again is falsificationism. So he sought to improve falsificationism. Now, the problem in falsificationism that Kuhn as well as Lakatos both would probably agree with is this. Falsificationism, what happens if you have one study that was done that flew in the face of current held beliefs of a particular theory? Was that one study sufficient to say that theory is now falsified? Well, Popper never really described what the circumstances should be, but potentially yes. That one case, that one study could falsify that theory. That theory could be correct. We don't know. That's what the opponents believed anyway. So what the opponents believed is that falsificationism either was not the way to go, or it's not the way it's done, or it should at least be improved upon. And that's where Lakatos pops up. He sought to improve falsificationism. He saw the way Popper did it as a naive falsificationism, and he wanted to develop a more sophisticated version. So ultimately, what he wanted to do was to prevent a theory from being falsified too quickly. All right, because falsification is basically, it's it. All right, so he wanted to delay falsification long enough for a theory to truly prove itself of worth or not. So that's what he did. And how he accomplished this task is he proposed the existence of what he referred to as a research program. Okay, a research program. And what he saw a program as, he saw it as a series of related theories sharing hardcore assumptions. Okay, so the hardcore assumptions are the assumptions that we take as the rule, as sacrosanct. We don't change them. That's just the way things are. They're hardcore assumptions, and they are not to be challenged. But we can have a bunch of other data and theories around it in the auxiliary belt that are the auxiliary hypotheses that form what they refer to as a protective belt at times, that can be challenged and is used to explain non-conforming data. So the idea is this: if someone does a study and it goes against this particular research program or series of theories, then the auxiliary belt will try to deal with it. But you're not touching my hardcore, is what it comes down to. Now, let me give you a real quick example. And this is the one that was in the notes, I believe, from celestial mechanics or stars and whatnot. What they would have as hardcore things that we do not question, it would be such things as laws of gravity, the speed of light. But other things in celestial mechanics you can question. For example, whether or not Pluto is a planet or something else. So the idea here is that in the auxiliary or protective belt are things that can be sacrificed for the protection of the hardcore. I use this example to, for example, you have the individual that you want to protect in the center, okay, and then you have the people who do the protecting. All right, so you can have a king in the center or some sort of government leader, and then around them will be their royal guard or secret service, whatever the equivalent is, and they're there to protect that individual. In this case, they're there to protect the hardcore, because we do not question our hardcore assumptions. That's just the way it is. Now, what do we mean about a series of theories? So let's say we have a theory, all right, T1. Now, theory 1 or T1 is only kicked to the side when another theory has been proven to be of value, because it predicts novel facts and explains empirical content of T1. So T2 is a better theory, but they both, T1 and T2, both share the hardcore assumptions. So the notion is this: theory 1, once it fails, it can be replaced by another theory. And that's another key aspect I want to make sure I emphasize here. In Popper's approach, once the theory has been falsified, it's dead, okay? But he never made any plans or had any things in place that says it needs to be replaced by another theory. Here, with Lakatos, and even to a degree with Kuhn, with Lakatos, definitely, we do not get rid of a theory until we have something that replaces it. You with me? So we keep our current significant other, even though you may be miserable and don't like everything that's going on with it, but you keep it until you have another significant other. It sounds really weird, but that's the way it goes. So T1 is only falsified when we have something else to replace it. And the thing that replaces it predicts the new facts, the anomalous facts that Kuhn would say pops up from time to time, and then explains everything that the theory 1 explained as well. All right, any questions on that? All right, I think you guys have it. Okay, so far then we've talked about the approach of the empiricists, Popper's approach, Kuhn's approach, and then Lakatos's approach. Then we get to the crazy guy, Feyerabend. Feyerabend was out there, and he basically was somewhat of a scientific anarchist, okay? And he believes in breaking the rules. Really, he really believed that in order to have progression in science, in order for it to progress, you had to break some rules. You had to go against the grain, so to speak. That's the only way it really works. So Feyerabend proposes this methodological anarchism that is required for science to progress. And falsificationism, he would say, was too harsh. The falsificationism that Popper had, and to an extent Lakatos, leads to premature death of theories. A theory dies before its time, and that's what much of the discussion has been about since Popper proposed it, is a theory dying on the vine, so to speak, before it had a chance to really prove itself. So falsification is flawed due to these implicit assumptions, all right? And so what Feyerabend basically states was, one, he did not hold to the idea that there's only one scientific method, okay? He eschewed those ideas that there was this one method that researchers need to learn. So that was one of the things. There is not one scientific method. He was a pluralist. He believed in pluralism, okay? And what this is that we can use many approaches, okay? Not one view or approach, but multiple views and approaches to do science. So he would be fine with the idea of using a variety of different types of research methodologies and approaches, even if they're somewhat unique, to get the job done. In a way, seeming very pragmatic, okay, very practical. So whatever it is for you as the researcher to find out what you need to find out, that's just fine. Okay, so this idea of pluralism, having many types of options, unique ones to choose from, was one of his ideas. Now, in the textbook, he talked about Galileo, who we discussed in several points here, ignored obvious evidence of falsification data that would have led to the rejection of a theory. Now, going back in time to the era of Galileo and before, remember one of the big debates, and also one of the things that Kuhn used to describe his paradigm and paradigm shift / scientific revolution, was the heliocentric and the geocentric models of the universe. Remember, there was this big debate for some time whether or not the geocentric model, which was the model of the day, basically said Earth was stationary, did not move, and was at the center of the universe. Bam, that was it. The crazy folks were the heliocentric folks, and they didn't have it correct themselves, but what they said is that no, the sun is at the center. And now we know today the sun is at the center of the solar system, okay, and we revolve and circle around the sun. Now, the church had play in this as well, because the church was definitely of the belief that we are special, we are humans, God's favorite, that type of thing, and therefore it makes sense that we are at the center of everything, and the world is stationary and everything revolves around us. So Galileo talks about this experiment, or it's discussed in the textbook, the tower argument. And what the tower argument is, and why we're talking about it here, is that the argument of the tower argument, where evidence seemingly proposed that the Earth was stationary. So the evidence seemingly said, hey, it looks like the Earth really isn't moving. So maybe all those heliocentric people have it wrong, that we're not on a ball or a rock circling around the sun, that we're on a ball of rock that's just stationary and everything revolves around us. So let's talk about the tower argument real quickly here. So the tower argument was one of the main objections against the theory of a moving earth. Those who were the supporters of Aristotle assumed that the fact that the stone which is dropped from a tower lands directly beneath it shows that the earth is stationary. So basically, let's think about it this way. If you are really, really high up and you drop a stone, if it's moving, you have a certain idea of where it should land. So the thought that if the earth moved while the stone was falling, the stone would have been left behind. So it should not fall at the base of the tower. It should fall further behind. So objects would fall diagonally instead of vertically. Since this does not happen, those supporters of the Aristotle view thought that it was evident that the earth did not move. All right. So you drop the stone. If it falls at the base, obviously the earth stopped moving. So if one uses ancient theories of impulse and relative motion, the Copernican theory indeed appears to be falsified by the fact that objects fall vertically on Earth. This observation required a new interpretation to make it compatible with Copernican theory. So Galileo was able to make such a change about the nature of impulse and relative motion. Before such theories were articulated, Galileo had to make such a sort of an ad hoc methods to proceed counter-inductively. So the idea here is this. In a way, he's sort of supporting both the idea of Lakatos, that he was sort of breaking the rules of the day about how science is done, because you had evidence smacking you in the face based on logic, in a sense, but he used methods to sort of explain it away, okay, to make it sense. So in a way, he's sort of using auxiliary hypothesis to protect one of the key assumptions, in this case, aka hardcore assumptions of their belief. So ad hoc hypotheses actually have a positive function. They temporarily make a new theory compatible with the facts until the theory can be defended and can be supported by other theories. So all this argument is really pointing to is that on the surface, it should have been something that could have falsified the whole Copernican approach, that the earth was indeed moving. So that was the notion that they proposed, okay? And this is what Lakatos uses this argument for in that last chapter of this particular module. Okay, so what we've done so far then, we have covered to the first part of this course. And the first part of this course is about science. We'll be moving into the philosophy of mind next. So in the first part of this course, how we get to know things about the world as viewed by science, as viewed by the empiricist, who saw everything is based on our senses, and the senses are the only thing that we should be looking at by way of gaining knowledge about the world, but albeit in a very passive way. The falsificationism, where the idea is that we're not trying to prove theories, but we're trying to falsify theory. And the idea is that once you falsify all the theories and you can't falsify the last one, then maybe that's the one that's the truth. Then we looked at Kuhn's paradigms, saying that no, we're not operating like Popper said. We're operating like human beings, that we have these shared beliefs and ways that we see things, the ways that we do things in our research. And all we really do is test to replicate and test to extend within the paradigm. We don't go about trying to destroy our work and destroying our theories. And then we see Lakatos with his research programs. Lakatos saying that no, we should use falsificationism, but a more sophisticated variety that gives the theories a longer life, because now the theories do have a longer life because they are now a series of theories that are related because of a hardcore beliefs that they share. So theories go through a lot of work and can prove themselves by this approach that Lakatos employs, and they're not going to be prematurely falsified. because here, one theory, once it is falsified, it can only be falsified when there's another theory ready to take its place. But again, it's going to be from the same family of theories. And then pluralism, the idea that Firebrand offers to us, basically communicating the notion that there is no one way to do it all, that doing science requires a very pragmatic approach, and many variety of approaches can be employed. So that is some of the key highlights from the first 3 chapters of our textbook, as well as the supplemental lecture materials as well. So just to wrap things up a little bit here, and I'll see if there's any questions. Now, what we're going to be doing next as we prepare, as you guys finish this module here, I'll have a study guide posted too for you guys shortly, so that you can make your last preparations in preparation for the exam that should be opening for you guys, I believe, this Friday. So when you open up the next module, we will be examining a key area of psychology, the mind. We're still not in psychology yet, but we're going to be looking at one key aspect of psychology, the mind. And we start off by the following question: what is the mind and what is reality? And what we'll see as we go through this material, as you read those chapters, 4, 5, 6, and 7 primarily, but 4 definitely, you'll start to question some of the things that we sort of take for granted. Okay, before I go to the next slide, one of the things I said in my 210 class just recently, I'll say it to you guys here. I'm sure I said it in the recorded lecture already too. How do you know that you're not dreaming now? Well, first of all, I know this is not the type of dream that you would normally have, but how do you know? And normally the only way that you know that you were dreaming is you wake up, because dreams can be very much real to us. And we'll see as we go through this next module, the whole question of reality does come into play, because there are going to be some of the philosophers that we're going to talk about will question whether or not where you think you are, what you think you are, is it real? It's going to be all sort of like the Matrix. And so we'll talk more about that when we get into module 2. So to wrap things up here, reminders, a couple of announcements, and see if you have any outstanding questions there. Module 1, we covered the logical positivism and Popper's falsificationism, Kuhn and scientific revolutions, Lakatos and Firebrand's research programs, and anarchism. And then we have also the idea that you guys have an essay assignment that will be due, I think, at the end of this particular module. So hopefully you're working on that and you can get that ready to get submitted. You guys are lucky in a way, because I used to have 6 of those essay assignments, but it got to be too much for me to maintain the grading and the feedback I wanted to do. And I've had a lot of large classes lately due to this pandemic thing. So it makes it a little bit more problematic there. So I've cut it down for you guys down to 3 essay assignments. One announcement I want to make sure, I don't know if you saw it or not. I do have a question. If when I post something in the announcements, do you guys get an email or something? Because I did post something in the announcements about psychology majors and pre-majors are invited to something called mentoring events. They had one, I believe it was yesterday. They have a few others. One out there I know is going to be about careers and ABA, which is a sort of a behavioral analysis thing, which I know some people are interested in. So if you don't get that stuff, yeah, great. So the idea is that those things are there for you, and please look at them, go attend them, because they'll give you a lot of insight into your future, particularly if you're looking at graduate school. And I want to remind you too, thank you to a particular student who got some information and shared it with me as well. I just want to remind you about the GSA. They have not posted it yet, so I can't provide that link to you yet, but this is the thing that's required for graduation. And students will receive a link to the test or registering for the test by email from the University College. And when I get one too, I'll make sure I get it to you, as well as posted the Canvas site. And also the Psychology Senior Assessment, a required component of the PSYC400 course, this course, and that will just roll up, or it'll be available to you guys a little bit before April 30th when that due date is done. And one student did point this out, and I want to state this about the GSA. This is only for students who started at FSU as a freshman and had a test as a freshman, and then had more than 90 credits is supposed to take the test. So that's where we are today. That is it for this check-in. If I have them more regularly, I can have a little bit more content focused on less content, so we can get a little bit more deeply in there. But again, you guys have all the recorded lectures or access to them, and so this is your time to listen to my key points I think are very important, and then I believe then you guys can ask questions at that time too. There is a question about what is the format for the test. I'm going to assume our test. If that's indeed the case, the format for our test is multiple choice, and there may be true false, and the test should open on, let's see, let me look at this real quickly. The way it's scheduled for all my classes is the Friday, so that should be the 19th all the way to the 22nd. So it opens on the 19th, so you have usually at midnight, so all day Friday, I guess technically, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday it will close down, should not be taken after 11:59 p.m. on Monday. All right, so that's it I have for you guys. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Sure.
Go.
You can go ahead. I'll wait.
Okay. I just had a question about the logical positivism.
Uh-huh.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, that is where Popper kind of grew from?
Yes, in a way, because we see the idea in that first chapter when they talk about it. The way I would like to think of it is this: the empiricists, they evolved into the logical positivists.
Okay.
Okay, and we have a lot of ideas that we still utilize today. Operationism, okay, so the operational definition, those types of things. So we still, even though Popper, sort of dogged on them in the first chapter, they still have a strong foundation, because science today is still rationalism and empiricism. They're sort of still key things for what we do.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Other question?
I just want to, okay, so I'm not having any problems with this assignment or with this like throughout the week, but what's the whole point of the discussion boards, just in general?
Discussion boards are there to see how you communicate. That's basically what it comes down to. There's several key things, and one of the things too, I don't know what the form of the GSA is now, but the CLA, that was part of it too. The idea is that you should be able to write at a certain level and communicate. I try to emphasize that when you're doing the discussion boards, don't use text speech or anything like that, like in an email, because it's not supposed to be that. There's an idea that you need to be able to communicate succinctly to some other individual. And that's what the point is there.
Okay.
Having been in business for several years, I can tell you right now, every time I had to write a memo and all this type of stuff, it's very helpful to have a lot of that type of writing in your background, because it can be very helpful, especially in the business area. I was an IO psychologist, so that's where I displayed a lot of these types of training. Believe it or not, research methods and this type of course are the courses that I relied on probably the most when I was in the business environment. Anything else? Okay, well, that's it. That's all I have for you guys. So if you have any questions after we end this session, you can email me. Also, I did send this out in an email too, but I want to remind you, I have not used the chat feature much on the Canvas site, but it is available there. If you guys want to use it, go at it, and we can figure out together how we can utilize it more effectively for you guys. So I just want to make sure that I made that announcement as well. All right, so you guys have a great rest of the night and a rest of the week too, and you can look for the test opening up this Friday, and I'll try to have a study guide available before that happens. All right, you guys take care. Bye.
All right, cool.